In 1812, Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, at the zenith of his power, embarked on a campaign that would forever alter the course of his reign and European history. This campaign, marked by ambition and audacity, would test the limits of his military genius and the resilience of his Grande Armée. Napoleon's target was Russia, a sprawling empire stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Pacific Ocean. The vastness of this land presented both a challenge and an opportunity for the French emperor. The French emperor envisioned a swift and decisive victory, a knockout blow that would force Tsar Alexander I to his knees and solidify Napoleon's dominance over the continent. His strategy was meticulously planned, with every detail considered to ensure a rapid conquest. Napoleon assembled a force of unprecedented scale and might, known as the Grande Armée. This was not just an army, it was a symbol of his imperial power and ambition. This colossal military machine comprised over 600,000 soldiers drawn from France and its conquered territories. It was a diverse coalition, representing the many nations under Napoleon's control. It was a diverse and formidable force, a testament to Napoleon's ambition and the reach of his empire. The soldiers, though from different backgrounds, were united under the banner of the Grande Armée. The Grande Armée was a force to be reckoned with, boasting seasoned veterans, cutting-edge artillery, and a logistical tail that stretched for hundreds of miles. The sheer scale of this force was unprecedented in European history. The invasion commenced in June 1812, with Napoleon's troops crossing the Niemen River into Russian territory. This marked the beginning of a campaign that would become one of the most infamous in military history. The French emperor anticipated a decisive engagement with the Russian army, a battle that would cripple Alexander's ability to resist. He believed that a single, overwhelming victory would bring the Russians to the negotiating table. However, the Russians, adopting a scorched earth policy, refused to engage in a major confrontation. They burned their own villages and fields, leaving nothing for the advancing French. Instead, they retreated deeper into the vast Russian interior, leaving behind a trail of desolation. This strategy of attrition began to take its toll on the Grande Armée. Napoleon, confident in his military genius and the strength of his army, pressed on. He was determined to reach Moscow, believing that its capture would force the Tsar to capitulate. He believed that the capture of Moscow, the Russian capital, would force the Tsar to sue for peace. The city, with its historical and political significance, was seen as the key to victory. The French emperor, however, underestimated both the Tsar's resolve and the unforgiving nature of the Russian landscape. The vast distances and harsh conditions were unlike anything his troops had faced before. He was marching into a trap, a land of vast distances, dwindling resources, and a winter of legendary severity. The Russian winter would prove to be one of the greatest challenges Napoleon and his Grande Armée would ever face. After months of grueling marches and skirmishes, Napoleon's Grande Armée finally reached the outskirts of Moscow in September 1812. The sight that greeted them was both awe-inspiring and unsettling. Moscow, with its gilded domes and sprawling wooden structures, presented a vision of exotic beauty. Yet the city was eerily deserted. The Russian army had retreated, leaving behind a silent and ominous void. On September 14, 1812, Napoleon, at the head of his weary but triumphant troops, entered Moscow. He fully expected to receive the Tsar's surrender, a delegation bearing terms of peace. However, no such delegation arrived. The silence of the city was deafening, a testament to the cunning and resolve of his enemy. Napoleon had captured Moscow, but the victory felt hollow. The city, once a symbol of Russian power and prestige, now lay largely deserted, its inhabitants vanished like ghosts. As night fell, the silence of Moscow was shattered by an eerie orange glow and the crackling of flames. Fires, whether set by Russian patriots or by accident, began to engulf the city. The wooden structures of Moscow, tinder dry after a long summer, ignited with terrifying speed. The fires raged for days, transforming Moscow into an inferno. The heart of Russia was consumed by flames, the flames of defiance and despair. Napoleon watched in dismay as the city he had conquered was ravaged by the flames. Moscow's destruction was a strategic blow, depriving the French army of much-needed shelter and supplies. The fires also served as a potent symbol of Russian resistance, a testament to the fact that the campaign was far from over. The burning of Moscow was a turning point in Napoleon's Russian campaign. The city's destruction, while a tactical setback, also had a profound psychological impact on both sides. For Napoleon and his troops, the fires were a stark reminder of the costs of their invasion. They had marched into Russia expecting a swift and decisive victory, but they now found themselves mired in a conflict with no end in sight. The destruction of Moscow also had a profound impact on the Russian people. The loss of their ancient capital, a city steeped in history and cultural significance, fueled their determination to resist the French invaders. The fires, while devastating, ignited a spirit of national unity and defiance that would ultimately prove to be Napoleon's undoing. Despite the setback, Napoleon lingered in Moscow for weeks, clinging to the hope that Alexander would negotiate. The Tsar, however, remained resolute, refusing to cede to Napoleon's demands. Time was running out for the French. The Russian winter, with its legendary brutality, was fast approaching. The French army, already weary from months of campaigning, was ill-prepared for the harsh Russian winter. Supplies were dwindling and the troops lacked adequate clothing and shelter to withstand the freezing temperatures. The once grand armée was beginning to unravel, its morale sapped by fatigue, hunger, and the growing realization that they were trapped in a hostile land thousands of miles from home. Section 4. The Seeds of Doubt, a Tsar Unbroken, a Winter Approaching. As October descended upon the ruins of Moscow, a sense of unease gripped the French army. The once proud soldiers who had marched triumphantly into the city now found themselves surrounded by desolation and uncertainty. The Tsar's silence was unnerving. Tsar Alexander I, a figure of stern resolve, remained an enigma, his intentions shrouded in mystery. No emissaries arrived to sue for peace, no envoys bearing white flags. The silence from the Russian side was deafening. No signs of surrender emerged from the scorched landscape. The land itself seemed to resist the invaders, offering nothing but ash and ruin. Napoleon's advisors, sensing the growing despair and the looming threat of winter, urged him to order a retreat. The emperor, however, hesitated. His pride and ambition clashed with the grim reality before him. To abandon Moscow so soon after its capture would be a humiliating blow, a confession of vulnerability that would embolden his enemies and tarnish his legacy. A confession of vulnerability that would embolden his enemies. The European powers, already wary of Napoleon's ambitions, would seize upon any sign of weakness. The situation in Moscow was deteriorating rapidly. The once grand city was now a shadow of its former self, a decaying husk. The city, ravaged by fire, offered little shelter or sustenance. The grand buildings that once stood as symbols of Russian might were now charred ruins. Food supplies were running low, the once plentiful stores now reduced to scraps, and foraging parties returned with meager pickings. The surrounding countryside, stripped bare, offered little relief. The morale of the French troops, once sky-high, plummeted with the temperature. The harsh reality of their situation began to set in. The soldiers, accustomed to the milder climates of France and Central Europe, were ill-equipped for the harsh Russian winter. Their thin uniforms offered little protection against the biting cold. As the first snowflakes began to fall, a sense of dread settled over the army. Napoleon finally acknowledged the dire reality of his situation. The Russian winter, which he had dismissed as a mere inconvenience, was now a formidable enemy. The Russian winter, which he had dismissed as a mere inconvenience, was now a formidable enemy. The blizzards and freezing temperatures were relentless. On October 19, 1812, after weeks of indecision, Napoleon issued the order to retreat from Moscow. The decision, though necessary, was a bitter pill to swallow. The once mighty Grande Armée, now a shadow of its former self, began its long and perilous journey westward, back towards the French border. The march was fraught with danger and despair. The retreat from Moscow would become one of the most harrowing military disasters in history. The soldiers, already weakened, faced an arduous journey. The French army, weakened by hunger, disease, and the relentless cold, faced constant harassment from Russian forces. The elements and the enemy conspired against them. Cossacks, mounted warriors renowned for their speed and ferocity, harassed the retreating columns, picking off stragglers and raiding supply lines. The retreat became a nightmare, a test of endurance and survival. Section 5. The Long Road Home, the Beginning of the End. The retreat from Moscow was a nightmare of epic proportions, a harrowing journey that tested the limits of human endurance and spirit. The French army, once a model of discipline and efficiency, began to disintegrate under the relentless pressure of the Russian winter and the constant attacks from the enemy. The once grand avenues of Moscow gave way to muddy tracks, often impassable due to the early onset of winter, turning their march into a grueling ordeal. The soldiers, their uniforms in tatters, their shoes worn through, trudged through the snow and mud, their bodies racked with exhaustion and hunger, their spirits slowly breaking. The relentless cold was their most formidable enemy, an invisible force that sapped their strength and will to survive. Temperatures plummeted to unimaginable lows, freezing men where they stood, turning the landscape into a frozen graveyard. The icy winds cut through their threadbare clothing, chilling them to the bone, making every step a battle against the elements. Frostbite became a constant threat, turning limbs black and useless, a painful reminder of their dire situation. Many soldiers, overcome by the cold and exhaustion, simply lay down in the snow and died, unable to continue the march. Adding to their misery was the constant harassment by the Russian forces, who took advantage of the French army's weakened state. The Cossacks, expert horsemen and skilled skirmishers, were masters of the hit-and-run attack, striking fear into the hearts of the retreating soldiers. They would emerge from the snowy plains, unleash a volley of arrows and gunfire, and vanish before the French could respond, leaving chaos in their wake. The Cossacks preyed on the stragglers, the sick and the wounded, leaving a trail of carnage in their wake, further demoralizing the French troops. The French army, already stretched thin, was ill-prepared to counter the Cossack threat, their defensive positions weak and vulnerable. Their supply lines, already overextended, were easy targets for the swift-moving Russian raiders, who struck with impunity. Food, ammunition, and medical supplies dwindled to dangerously low levels, leaving the soldiers in a desperate situation. The soldiers, weakened by hunger and exposure, became more susceptible to disease, their bodies unable to fight off the infections that spread through the ranks. Dysentery, typhus, and pneumonia ravaged the ranks, claiming as many lives as the Russian guns and the unforgiving cold, turning the retreat into a death march.